Megan, a biased flight attendant, kicks a young black girl named Amara off the plane, claiming she was causing trouble. But just 7 minutes later, an unexpected twist forces the airline to quickly respond as the tables turn completely. Amara suddenly has the chance to get her well-deserved revenge. How can a small act of injustice explode into something much bigger? Before we dive into the story, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe if you like this story. Amara, a 10-year-old black girl, stood beside her Aunt Nia in the bustling airport terminal. Her big round eyes anxiously scanned the crowd, watching strangers rush past. Gripping her favorite backpack tightly, Amara took a deep breath, trying to push away the nervousness. This was her first time flying alone without her dad to visit her mom after months of being apart due to her parents' divorce. Aunt Nia, a strong woman with her natural curls neatly tied back, gently placed a hand on Amara's shoulder. "Are you okay, Amara?" Nia asked in a soft but concerned voice. Amara nodded slightly, trying to smile but unable to hide her worry. "I'm a little nervous, Aunt Nia." Nia chuckled softly, giving Amara's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "That's perfectly normal, Amara. We're going to have a great trip visiting your mom. She's really looking forward to seeing you." As they made their way to the boarding gate, Amara couldn't help but notice how different she and her aunt looked. Compared to the other passengers, they wore simple, comfortable clothes, while many others were dressed in business suits or fancy dresses. Amara wore her favorite superhero t-shirt, paired with her old sneakers. Her eyes caught a few curious glances from strangers. "Aunt Nia," Amara whispered, tugging at her aunt's sleeve, "do you think we should have dressed fancier?" Nia looked down at Amara, her kind eyes sparkling with understanding. She smiled and replied, "There's no dress code for flying, Amara. The important thing is that we're comfortable, especially on a long flight." Amara nodded, though the feeling of being out of place lingered inside her. The past few months had been filled with stress from court hearings and tense conversations between her parents. This trip felt like a chance to bring some peace back, but the nervous pit in her stomach refused to go away. She sensed the chaos within her, but being next to Aunt Nia made her feel a bit safer. As they sat down in the waiting area at the gate, Aunt Nia noticed the worried look on Amara's face. "What's on your mind, Amara?" Amara hesitated before whispering, "I'm really happy I'm going to see Mom, but what if things are weird? What if she's changed?" Nia's heart sank hearing her niece's fears. She pulled Amara closer, wrapping her arms around her. "Your mom loves you so much, Amara. No matter what happens, that will never change. This is a chance for you and your mom to spend time together and have fun. Her love for you never changes." Amara leaned into Aunt Nia, feeling some of her anxiety melt away, though the worry quickly returned as the boarding gate opened. Other passengers began lining up to board the plane, and Amara clung tightly to Aunt Nia's hand, following closely behind the crowd. This was her first flight, and the tension in her chest remained, despite Aunt Nia's best efforts to reassure her. As they handed over their tickets and stepped onto the plane, Amara couldn't shake the odd feeling of walking into a crowded space filled with strangers. The air inside the plane had a faint scent of air conditioning, mixed with the smell of leather and fabric from the seats. The murmur of other passengers added to Amara's sense of confusion, but Aunt Nia's warm smile helped her feel a little more at ease. "Are you okay, Amara?" Nia asked gently as Amara began to look around, her big, curious, and nervous eyes darting about. "I'm okay," Amara replied, though her voice trembled slightly. Aunt Nia quickly found their seats in the middle of the plane. "Do you want to sit by the window?" Nia asked, her smile full of love. Amara's eyes lit up. "Really? I can sit there?" she asked, unable to hide her excitement at the thought of sitting next to the window for the entire flight. "Of course, Amara," Nia smiled, encouraging her. "You'll have a great view of everything from up high." Amara quickly climbed into the window seat, pressing her face against the glass, to look out at the busy airport scene. The tiny luggage carts moved around like toys, and the long runway snaked ahead like a ribbon stretched out before her. For the first time that day, a spark of excitement began to grow in Amara's heart. She felt like she was about to embark on an exciting adventure, something she had never dared to imagine before. While Amara enjoyed the view outside, Aunt Nia settled into the middle seat and began organizing their belongings. She gently pushed Amara's backpack under the seat, then pulled out books and snacks for the flight. They were ready for the journey, and Nia smiled, hoping the trip would go smoothly. Just then, an elderly woman with silver hair and a kind face approached and took the aisle seat next to them. She smiled warmly at both Nia and Amara, her eyes shining with friendliness. "Hello there," she said in a calm voice. "It looks like we'll be sitting together on this flight. I'm Joyce, and what's your name?" Amara glanced at Mrs. Joyce, feeling a bit shy, but after a moment she decided to answer politely. "I'm Amara," she said softly. "This is my first time flying." "Really?" Mrs. Joyce beamed. "The first flight is always special. You're going to have a wonderful experience." Amara smiled slightly, starting to feel more comfortable talking to Mrs. Joyce. They began chatting about Amara's upcoming trip and how she was going to visit her mom after months apart. The conversation helped Amara forget her initial nerves. She felt happier thinking about the reunion with her mom, and she began laughing more as she shared her hopes for the trip. Meanwhile, not far away, flight attendant Megan was walking up and down the aisles, helping passengers store their luggage and ensuring everything was in order before takeoff. However, her eyes kept drifting toward Amara and Nia's row. Megan noticed their simple appearance with comfortable, casual clothing. She focused on Amara's superhero t-shirt and Nia's worn-out jacket, which she had stuffed under the seat. Negative thoughts quickly formed in Megan's mind. She muttered to herself, "They must be flying on employee or family discount tickets." Megan had worked in the airline industry long enough to develop certain biases about passengers like Amara and Nia, those who didn't fit the norm she was used to. In Megan's experience, passengers like them were often inexperienced flyers who might cause trouble. As Megan approached their row for a final check before takeoff, she overheard Amara giggling while talking to Mrs. Joyce. Megan scrutinized Amara's superhero shirt and her scuffed-up sneakers. She shot a quick glance at Nia with her old jacket and hastily tied-up hair. A flash of irritation crossed Megan's mind. She told herself she'd have to keep an eye on this row throughout the flight. "Do you need anything?" Megan asked, her tone polite but lacking warmth. Her eyes glanced over the three of them indifferently. Aunt Nia looked up, smiling politely. "No, thank you. We're all settled." Megan nodded curtly, without returning the smile, and walked away. However, in her mind, she had already marked them as potential troublemakers. Although there was no concrete evidence, she had decided to watch them closely throughout the flight, especially Amara, who seemed too enthusiastic and could do something Megan considered disruptive. With that thought, Megan walked to the back of the plane, but her eyes remained fixed on Amara and Nia's row. She was ready to intervene at any moment if she sensed something was off. In Megan's mind, her judgments based on appearance made her believe she would have to deal with a situation on this flight. Megan thought back to past experiences where she had to deal with uncooperative passengers, and she mentally prepared herself for any incident. It wasn't long before what Megan had imagined began to unfold. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Amara suddenly remembered that she had left her book in her backpack in the overhead compartment. She softly called to Aunt Nia, her voice anxious. "Aunt Nia, I forgot to get my book. Can I grab it now?" Aunt Nia nodded gently. "Sure, but be careful, Amara. The plane's about to take off." Amara quickly unbuckled her seatbelt, stood up, and reached for her backpack. She stretched as far as she could to grab it, just as the sound of high heels clacking loudly on the floor echoed down the aisle. Megan's sharp footsteps grew closer to their row. Her face twisted into a frown when she saw Amara standing. She marched up to her, exhaling sharply through her nose. "Sit down immediately," Megan snapped, her voice full of irritation. "You're causing a disruption." Amara froze, her eyes wide with shock. She didn't understand why she was being scolded for simply wanting to get her book. "Aunt." Nia looked up, seeing Amara's confusion, and quickly explained. "I'm sorry. Amara was just trying to get her book from her backpack. The plane hasn't taken off yet, and she wasn't trying to cause any trouble." But Megan wasn't listening. She cut off Nia coldly. "I don't want to hear any excuses. She needs to sit down and buckle her seatbelt immediately." Her tone was firm, lacking the usual politeness of a flight attendant. Nia remained calm but firm, responding softly. "We understand the safety rules, and Amara was only trying to get her book before takeoff. There's no need to be so tense about it." Megan scowled and shot a cold glance at Nia. "If you can't keep her seated, maybe you shouldn't be flying. We don't have time to deal with disruptive passengers." Her voice grew louder, causing nearby passengers to turn their heads and watch. Amara, now embarrassed and scared, quickly sat down and buckled her seatbelt again. She kept her head down, too afraid to look up. Aunt Nia tried to comfort her, placing a hand on her shoulder, but her eyes couldn't hide the mix of confusion and anger she felt. Naya looked back at Megan, trying to explain again. "You're overreacting. We were just trying to—" But Megan didn't let Nia finish. "That's enough," she snapped, her tone now harsher. "If you can't follow the rules, I'll have to talk to the captain." Megan's eyes blazed, and she made no effort to hide her irritation. The surrounding passengers started murmuring. Some seemed sympathetic, while others looked at Amara and Naya with curiosity and confusion. Mrs. Joyce, sitting beside them, gently placed her hand on Megan's arm, trying to speak. "Ms. Megan, I don't think this is as serious as you're making it. The little girl was just—" Megan didn't bother to turn toward Mrs. Joyce, coldly replying, "Please don't interfere, ma'am." Amara felt her face grow hot with shame. She could feel everyone's eyes on her. Those stares made Amara wish she could disappear right then and there. Tears began to well up in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Aunt Nia," Amara whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble." Nia hugged Amara tightly and whispered, "It's okay, Amara. You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes people will judge and treat others unfairly, but we'll get through this together." However, Megan wasn't finished. She had spoken to the captain and returned with a more determined attitude. "I've reported this to the captain," Megan declared, her voice carrying through the cabin. "You and this child need to leave the plane immediately. This behavior is unacceptable, and we cannot allow it to continue." Aunt Nia was stunned by the outrageous accusation. She stood up, trying to keep her tone calm but unable to hide her frustration. "Are you serious? We haven't done anything wrong. This is a misunderstanding, and you're treating us unfairly." But Megan wasn't listening. She stood firm, and soon 2 security personnel entered the cabin. The entire plane went silent as they approached Amara and Nia. "We've been informed that you need to leave the flight," one of the security officers said, his tone polite but leaving no room for argument. Nia tried to protest, but it was no use. "This is discrimination. We haven't done anything wrong," she said. But the security personnel remained firm in asking them to exit the plane. Amara, now sobbing, clung tightly to Aunt Nia as the 2 of them were escorted off, under the curious and sympathetic eyes of some passengers. Among them was Mrs. Joyce, who whispered, "This isn't right. They didn't do anything wrong." However, Mrs. Joyce's words seemed to fall on deaf ears as Amara and Nia were led off the plane, leaving behind a cabin full of curious stares and tense silence. As Nia and Amara exited the plane, Amara clung to her aunt, tears streaming down her face. They walked into the airport waiting area, still stunned and confused. Amara couldn't understand why they had been kicked off the plane when they had done nothing wrong. Nia hugged Amara tightly, trying to comfort her, but inside, a fire of anger and injustice was burning. Amara whispered, her voice shaky, "Aunt Nia, did we do something wrong?" Nia looked down at Amara, her eyes gentle but pained as she saw the innocence in her niece's eyes. "No, Amara, we didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes people judge and treat others based on their appearance, and it's completely unfair." Amara nodded slightly, but she couldn't shake the feeling of embarrassment and shame. The curious stares from the plane, the hushed whispers, all of it seemed to linger in her mind. But Nia knew this couldn't be the end. She looked around, took a deep breath, and said to Amara, "We're not going to let them treat us like this without doing something. I'm going to make sure they're held accountable for their actions." With that, Nia pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. She quickly called a friend who was a civil rights lawyer and also a prominent investor in the airline they had just flown with. When the call connected, Nia kept her voice steady, though the anger and frustration were evident in her words. "Hey Sam, it's Naya. I'm sorry to call on your day off, but this is urgent. Something serious just happened on a flight with the airline you're invested in." As Nia explained the situation, her voice became more assertive and professional. Sam, a powerful businessman, heard the anger in Nia's words and immediately agreed to take action. "I'll call the airline right away and demand they address this. This can't go unchecked." While Nia was on the phone, another passenger who had witnessed the entire incident wasn't sitting idly by. Sarah, a young woman seated a few rows behind Naya and Amara on the flight, had recorded the entire scene where Megan rudely confronted them. Sarah was shocked and outraged by the way Nia and Amara had been treated. As soon as she left the plane, she sat down in the waiting area and began editing the video before posting it on social media. "I can't believe what I just witnessed," Sarah wrote along with the video. "A little girl and her aunt were treated unfairly just because of how they looked. We can't let this continue." Sarah quickly hit share and posted the video across all her social media accounts. The video went viral at an incredible speed. Within hours, thousands of people had seen, shared, and commented on the situation. Outrage erupted across online forums and community groups, with people condemning the discrimination that Nia and Amara had experienced. Hashtags like Justice for Amara and discrimination on the plane began trending, drawing attention not only from the public, but also from civil rights organizations. As Nia finished her call with Sam and returned to her seat next to Amara, her phone started buzzing with notifications. She opened her phone and realized that the video of the incident had begun to spread across social media. Her eyes widened in surprise. She turned to Amara and gently said, "Someone recorded what happened and posted it online. The whole world is seeing how we were treated, and people are standing with us." Amara blinked, not fully understanding what was happening. "What does that mean, Aunt Nia?" Nia smiled softly, though the anger in her heart hadn't completely faded. "It means we're not alone, Amara. People are standing up for us. They saw the injustice and they're not staying silent, and that's going to make a difference." Nia spoke with determination as she looked at her phone, watching the notifications pour in. Shares, comments, and messages of support from people all over began flooding in. Nia could feel the public's anger rising against the way they had been treated. Just hours after the video went viral, mainstream media outlets caught wind of the story. News sites and TV programs quickly picked up the story, with headlines like, "Passengers kicked off plane for discrimination?" On television, reporters and civil rights experts began discussing the issue of discrimination in the airline industry, with Amara and Nia's story at the center of the conversation. Meanwhile, at the airline's headquarters, the crisis was escalating rapidly. The company's executives were bombarded with calls from shareholders and partners, demanding an explanation for the incident. Sam, Nia's friend, had also called the airline's CEO directly, demanding immediate action. The public outcry and pressure from powerful investors had forced the airline into a corner, and they had to act fast. The next morning, as Nia and Amara were still waiting at the airport, they received a message from the airline's management. A well-dressed man in a black suit approached them, his eyes showing signs of stress, though he kept his voice calm. "Good morning, Ms. Nia and Amara," he began, his voice steady but clearly tense. "I'm Marcus, a senior manager at the airline. I want to extend the airline's deepest apologies for the incident that occurred on your flight yesterday. We've been made aware of the situation, and we sincerely apologize for the inconvenience and the feelings of injustice you've experienced." Nia listened, keeping a neutral expression. She knew this apology was only scratching the surface of a much bigger problem. "What exactly are you apologizing for?" she asked directly, her tone calm but sharp. "Is it for the inconvenience, or is it for the way your flight attendant treated us unfairly and discriminated against us?" Marcus hesitated for a moment at Nia's straightforward question, but he quickly regained his composure. "We're apologizing for both. We're conducting a full investigation into the incident and have placed flight attendant Megan on temporary leave while we thoroughly review the situation." Nia looked Marcus straight in the eye, unwavering. "This isn't just about me and Amara. This is about how your staff treats passengers based on their appearance, clothing, and race. That's not just wrong. It's a sign of a deeper systemic issue in the airline industry. What are you going to do to change that?" Marcus sighed, realizing this conversation wasn't going to be easy. "We fully understand the seriousness of this incident. We are committed to improving our staff training processes to ensure situations like this never happen again. Additionally, we'd like to offer you and Amara a complimentary first-class flight today and ensure that you are treated with the utmost care." Nia nodded, though disappointment was still clear in her eyes. "I appreciate the apology and the offer, but that's not a real solution. A first-class flight can't make up for the harm Amara has gone through, and it certainly doesn't guarantee that others won't face the same discrimination." Amara, sitting quietly beside Nia, listened to the exchange, feeling the anger bubbling up inside her. She looked up at her aunt, feeling the strength of her words. To Amara, this wasn't just about being kicked off the plane, it was about fairness and dignity, something she was just starting to understand. Realizing a simple apology and a flight upgrade weren't enough, Marcus nodded, hesitating before speaking again. "I understand. We won't stop here. I'll be bringing this issue to higher levels to discuss long-term policy changes." Nia said nothing more, simply smiling lightly. "I hope you're serious about that." After Marcus left, Nia and Amara prepared to board their new flight, but Nia knew their battle wasn't over. They weren't just looking for better service, they wanted to change the system so no one else would have to go through what they had. This wasn't just about a first-class flight or an apology. It was about real change to end discrimination in the airline industry. As the plane took off, Nia sat quietly, thinking about their next move. As a civil rights attorney, Nia knew that a public apology wouldn't solve the root problem. We can't let this pass so easily, Nia thought. Her anger wasn't just about what had happened to her and Amara, but for the thousands of others who may have gone through similar discrimination without a voice. Once they returned home, Nia wasted no time getting to work. She reached out to her colleagues, fellow attorneys, social activists, and human rights organizations. It didn't take long for Nia to assemble a legal team ready to help her file a lawsuit against the airline for discrimination. They began gathering information, analyzing the video, and preparing evidence for the upcoming case. While Nia and her legal team worked on the case, Amara started to realize the amount of public support pouring in for their story. The social media posts continued to spread, and many people began sharing similar stories of facing discrimination while flying. The empathy and strong reaction from the public had turned Amara and Nia's story into part of a larger movement for equality in public services. One evening, as Nia was sitting at her computer working, Amara walked into the room, her big round eyes filled with curiosity. "Aunt Nia," she asked softly, "what are we going to do next? Do you think we'll win?" Nia looked up from her computer, smiling gently at her niece. "We're going to fight, Amara. I can't promise we'll win right away, but we're going to do everything we can to make sure we get justice. Not just for us, but for everyone else who's been treated unfairly." Amara nodded slowly, feeling the determination in her aunt's words. She didn't feel as scared as before. Though there was still some worry, Amara knew that they were standing up for something bigger than just themselves. Over the next few weeks, the media continued to report on the case, and civil rights organizations formally voiced their support for Nia's lawsuit. Major news networks, from national television channels to local papers, closely followed the developments. Legal experts and civil rights advocates frequently appeared on discussion panels, analyzing and condemning the discriminatory practices within the airline industry, with Amara and Nia's case as the focal point. The support from the public only grew stronger. Many passengers who had experienced similar situations began sharing their stories. Letters of support from all over the country started pouring in for Nia and Amara. Calls, emails, and messages from strangers, all expressing their empathy and desire to join the fight. The movement had grown beyond a personal issue into a larger fight for equality in the airline industry and other public services. Amara, once a shy and timid girl, gradually began to feel the power of the solidarity surrounding her. One afternoon, while reading the supportive messages, she looked at her aunt and said, "I'm not scared anymore, Aunt Nia. I think we're doing the right thing." Nia smiled proudly. "You're very brave, Amara. The most important thing is that we never stay silent in the face of injustice. And you've done that." The official lawsuit filing day was approaching. Nia's legal team had prepared thoroughly, knowing that this case would have far for them, but also on airline discrimination policies. Nia, with the determination of a civil rights attorney, was ready to bring the issue to light. The public continued to follow the case closely, and small protests in support of Nia and Amara began appearing at airports across the country. Banners with slogans like "Fairness for all" and "Passengers are not targets of discrimination" were held high. Those who stood up in support believed that Nia and Amara's lawsuit would be a major step toward protecting everyone's rights, regardless of skin color or appearance. With strong public backing and a solid legal team, Nia and Amara knew they were no longer alone in this journey. They were now representing a larger fight, a fight for fairness and human rights for everyone. The legal battle had only just begun, but Nia knew that with perseverance and support from thousands of people behind them, they could bring about real change. When the day of the court trial arrived, Nia and Amara entered the courtroom with a sense of determination. Outside, a crowd of supporters gathered with signs of encouragement, demanding justice and human rights for all. Inside, reporters and journalists filled the seats, cameras pointing toward them. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense, with everyone's eyes fixed on Nia and Amara's every step. Amara felt her heart race, but when she saw Aunt Nia's gentle smile and the overwhelming support from the community, she knew she was representing thousands of people who didn't have the chance to speak up. Squeezing Nia's hand tightly, Amara closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to stay calm. The trial began with Nia's legal team presenting undeniable evidence of the airline's discriminatory behavior and Megan's actions. The video recorded by a passenger that had gone viral on social media played on a large screen. The courtroom fell silent, with only the sound of the video and the quiet murmurs of those watching. The image of Megan rudely yelling at Amara and kicking them off the plane was crystal clear, speaking volumes about the injustice they had faced. Witnesses from the flight that day were also called to the stand. Mrs. Joyce, who had sat next to Nia and Amara, took the stand with a steady but determined voice. "I sat next to them the entire flight, and they did absolutely nothing wrong. Amara was just a little girl trying to get her book before the plane took off. Megan's reaction was unnecessary and clearly based on their appearance." Each testimony and every piece of evidence strengthened Nia's case. The airline's legal team, though trying to defend Megan's actions and argue that she was simply following protocol, was quickly rebutted. With sharp questions and strong arguments, Nia and her colleagues demonstrated that this wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a larger issue of discrimination in the airline industry. Throughout the trial, Amara sat quietly, observing everything. She felt that she had overcome her initial fear and replaced it with determination. Every time she saw Aunt Nia confidently and passionately defending their rights, Amara felt proud. Aunt Nia wasn't just fighting for their rights, she was fighting for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly like them. Finally, after several days of intense trial proceedings, the court ruled in favor of Nia and Amara. Inside the courtroom, the air seemed to hold its breath as the judge declared that the airline was responsible for the discriminatory treatment and ordered them to compensate and revise their staff training policies. The court also required the airline to issue a public apology and implement mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff. Amara couldn't believe her ears. She turned to Aunt Nia, her eyes wide with surprise and excitement. "Aunt Nia, we won!" Amara exclaimed, her voice filled with joy. Nia smiled, bending down to hug Amara tightly. "Yes, we did, sweetheart. But this is just the first step. We stood up and won, not just for ourselves, but for so many others." As they stepped out of the courtroom, the crowd outside erupted into applause and cheers. "Report!" Ears quickly swarmed them, microphones and cameras aimed at Nia and Amara. They realized that their story was no longer just a small, personal battle. It had become a symbol for the fight for justice and human rights in the airline industry. Nia, her voice firm, addressed the media. "Today, we didn't just win for the two of us. We won for everyone who has ever been treated unfairly because of how they look or the color of their skin. We will continue to fight to ensure that this never happens again." Amara, though still a bit shy from all the media attention, was more confident this time standing next to Aunt Nia. She knew that she had been part of this fight, and her courage had helped change a small part of the world. The legal battle had ended, but Nia and Amara understood that the journey toward ensuring justice for all was far from over. However, with the community's solidarity and the strength of perseverance, they believed that real change was possible. Even after their victory in court, they knew that changing the system was a long process that wouldn't happen overnight. But the event had